They threw a Navy SEAL out with nothing, but his dog found a hidden secret that powerful men were desperate to bury. The day Caleb Ward lost everything, the mountains didn't care. Snow fell, the wind cut through the trees, and the men who erased his life drove away without looking back. But his dog didn't move, because buried beneath a broken outlaw's shack was something no one was supposed to find. And now, they were coming back for it. Comment 1 if you'd fight to keep what's yours, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell me where you're watching from. The sound of tires on gravel came first. Caleb Ward heard it long before the vehicles came into view, the low crunch echoing across the thin mountain air like a warning carried on stone. He stood still beside the split rail fence at the edge of his property, one gloved hand resting loosely against the weathered wood, his eyes fixed down the narrow road that cut through the pines. Ghost heard it too. The German shepherd lifted his head from where he had been lying near the porch steps, ears snapping forward, body going rigid in a single controlled motion. There was no bark, no movement, just stillness, the kind trained into him long ago, the kind that meant attention, not panic. 3 vehicles appeared between the trees. Black, clean, out of place. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they had nowhere else to be. Caleb didn't recognize them, but he recognized the posture, the quiet authority of people who weren't asking permission. He exhaled once, slow and measured. "Stay," he said quietly. Ghost didn't move, but his eyes never left the approaching convoy. The vehicles stopped in front of the cabin, engines idling. For a moment, nothing happened. The mountain was silent again, except for the wind sliding through the high branches and the faint ticking of cooling metal. Then the doors opened. 4 men stepped out. One woman followed behind them, carrying a leather folder tucked under her arm. They were dressed for cold weather, but not for this kind of cold. Their boots were clean, their coats too new. They walked like they had never spent a night out here. Caleb didn't step forward to meet them. He stayed where he was. One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark wool coat, took the lead. He moved with confidence, scanning the property briefly before his gaze settled on Caleb. "Mr. Ward?" the man called. Caleb didn't answer right away. He studied him first. The stance, the tone, the way the others positioned themselves just behind him. Chain of command. "Yeah," Caleb said finally. The woman stepped forward then, opening the folder. Papers shifted in the wind, edges snapping softly. "We're here regarding a court-ordered seizure of this property," she said, her voice clear but distant, like she'd practiced it too many times to feel anything anymore. "There's been a dispute tied to the original land grant. The ruling was finalized last week." Caleb frowned slightly. Not confusion. Calculation. "I didn't get anything," he said. "You were notified at your last registered address. This is my address." A brief pause. The tall man stepped closer. "That's not what's on file." Ghost let out a low, controlled growl. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive in the way most people understood aggression. It was something else. Focused. Intent. The man's eyes flicked down to the dog. "Call him off," he said. Caleb didn't look at Ghost. "He's not doing anything." Ghost didn't stop. The growl deepened, subtle but unmistakable, vibrating through his chest as his gaze locked onto the man in the wool coat. Not the others, just him. Caleb noticed that. That detail slid into place quietly in the back of his mind. The woman continued, as if the moment hadn't happened. You have until noon today to vacate the premises. After that, removal procedures will begin. Caleb looked past her, out across the property. The cabin stood behind him, small and weathered but solid. He'd built half of it himself over the last 3 years. The porch still held the chair he'd sanded down by hand, the woodpile stacked along the side, the narrow trail leading down toward the creek. Everything here had a place. Everything here had a memory. And if I don't? He asked. The tall man answered this time. Then we proceed. Simple, direct. Caleb nodded once. No argument, no raised voice. Just acceptance, the kind that came from knowing when a situation had already been decided somewhere far away, by people who would never stand where he was standing. All right, he said. The words seemed to surprise them. The woman blinked. The man hesitated for half a second, like he had expected resistance. A fight. Something to justify the force already waiting behind them. They didn't get it. Caleb turned and walked back toward the cabin. Ghost moved instantly, falling into step beside him, but he didn't break his focus. Even as he walked, his head turned slightly, eyes still locked on the man in the coat. Inside, the cabin felt smaller. Caleb moved through it without hesitation. He didn't stop to look at anything for too long. He didn't touch the things that mattered more than the rest. He grabbed his duffel from the corner, packed what he could carry. Clothes, a few tools, a small metal box from the shelf. Every movement was efficient, controlled. Outside, the men had already started. 2 of them moved toward the shed. Another began marking items on a clipboard. The sound of boots on wood echoed across the porch as one stepped inside without knocking. Caleb didn't say anything. Ghost stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance for a second longer than necessary before stepping aside. But the message was clear. You don't belong here. The man avoided his eyes. By late morning, it was done. Furniture loaded, tools taken, boxes sealed. The cabin was empty in a way that didn't just mean space, it meant absence, like something had been pulled out of it, leaving only the shell behind. Caleb stood at the edge of the yard again, duffel slung over his shoulder. Ghost sat beside him, still, alert. The tall man approached one last time. This property is now under new ownership, he said. You're not permitted to return. Caleb met his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ghost growled again. Not louder, but sharper. The man's jaw tightened. Control your dog. Caleb didn't move. He is. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow from higher up the ridge. Caleb turned away. He didn't look back at the cabin, didn't watch the men finish their work, didn't acknowledge the life that had been there that morning and was gone now. He just walked. Ghost followed without hesitation. Step for step, they reached the road and kept going, the sound of gravel under their boots fading into the trees. Behind them, the vehicles started again. Ahead, the mountains stretched out cold and silent. Caleb adjusted the strap on his shoulder, his expression unchanged. But something had shifted. Not in what he'd lost, in what he'd noticed. And as Ghost walked beside him, ears still alert, scanning the world with quiet precision, Caleb knew one thing for certain. That moment, that man, that reaction, none of it had been random. And whatever this was, it wasn't over. The road curved down out of the high ridge, winding through pine and rock, before opening toward the small mountain town below. By the time Caleb Ward reached the edge of it, the sun had shifted behind a layer of gray cloud, turning the sky into a flat, cold sheet of light. Ghost slowed beside him. Not from fatigue, from awareness. His ears stayed forward, head slightly lowered, eyes moving, not nervously, but precisely, scanning every corner, every passing vehicle, every shadow that lingered longer than it should. Caleb noticed that too. He didn't say anything. They walked into town together. The place was small, a main street with a handful of buildings, wood and brick, worn but standing, a gas station, a hardware store, a diner with a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the cold air. Smoke drifted from chimneys, thin and steady. Normal life, the kind that didn't stop just because someone lost everything. Caleb stepped onto the sidewalk, boots heavy with dust and miles. People glanced at him, then at Ghost, then away. He headed for the hardware store first. Inside, the air smelled like oil, sawdust, and old metal. Tools lined the walls, organized in a way that made sense to someone who worked with their hands every day. A man behind the counter looked up. Late 50s, gray beard, weathered face. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Caleb set his duffel down slowly. "Looking for work," he said. "Anything. Repairs, hauling. I can handle equipment." The man studied him for a moment. Then his eyes shifted to Ghost. "That your dog?" "Yeah." "Trained?" Caleb gave a small nod. More than most. Another pause. The man sighed quietly, almost to himself. "I don't doubt that, but I've got nothing open right now." Caleb didn't push. "All right," he said. He picked up his duffel and walked out. No argument, no explanation, just another door closed. They moved on. The gas station was next. Same result. A shake of the head, a muttered apology. By the third place, Caleb stopped asking. He shifted strategy. Observation over effort. They walked the street without speaking, Caleb's eyes moving the same way Ghost's did, taking in patterns, faces, routines. Who lingered, who avoided eye contact, who watched too long. Ghost stayed close to his left side. Not tight. Not nervous. But ready. They passed the diner again. This time, Caleb stopped. The neon sign flickered above the door, casting a faint red glow on the glass. Inside, a few people sat at booths, cups of coffee in front of them, the low murmur of conversation barely audible through the door. He pushed it open. Warm air hit him immediately, carrying the smell of coffee, grease, and something baked. For a moment, everything slowed. The clatter of plates, the hum of voices, the ordinary rhythm of a place untouched by what had just happened to him. Ghost stepped in behind him, silent as always. Heads turned. Not dramatically. Not all at once, but enough. Caleb walked to the counter and sat. Ghost settled beside him without being told. A woman approached from behind the counter. Mid-50s, strong posture, tired eyes that had seen more than she said out loud. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Coffee," Caleb said. She poured it without another word. Set it down in front of him. He wrapped his hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep into his fingers. For a moment he just sat there, staring into the dark surface. "Passing through?" she asked. "No," Caleb said. She waited. "Just got here." Her eyes flicked to the duffel, then to Ghost, then back to him. "Name's Martha," she said. "Martha Hale." "Caleb." She nodded once. "You got a place to stay, Caleb?" He shook his head slightly. "Working on it." She leaned against the counter, arms folded. Town's tight this time of year. Not much opens up when winter's coming in. "I noticed." Another pause. She slid a plate across the counter. Eggs, toast, simple. "I didn't order that," Caleb said. "I know," she replied. He hesitated, then nodded once. "Thank you." He ate slowly, not because he wanted to stretch it out, because his body was remembering what real food felt like after hours of cold and silence. Ghost stayed alert, eyes moving, watching the room. Every now and then, his gaze would snap toward the window, then hold, then return. Caleb followed one of those glances. A truck passed by outside. Dark, clean, out of place. It didn't slow down, but it didn't feel like it belonged either. Caleb's grip tightened slightly around the fork. He said nothing. Martha noticed. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No," he said, but Ghost didn't relax. After he finished eating, Caleb stood and reached for his wallet. Martha shook her head. "Don't worry about it. I can pay." "I know you can," she said. "Just not today." He studied her for a moment. "All right," he said quietly. He left a few crumpled bills on the counter anyway. Not enough to cover it, but enough to mean something. Outside, the air felt colder, the sky darker, the town quieter than it had been before. Caleb stepped off the sidewalk, adjusting the strap on his shoulder again. Ghost moved beside him, closer now, more alert. "All right," Caleb said under his breath. "Let's figure it out." They walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the road split into smaller paths leading back into the mountains. Behind them, the diner door opened briefly, then closed again. Martha watched from inside. She didn't call out, didn't stop him. Some people needed help, others needed space. Caleb kept walking. The road ahead was empty. The mountains waited. Cold, unforgiving, and full of things no one talked about. Ghost slowed again, head lifting, ears forward. He looked back. Not at the town, not at the road. At something farther out. Something Caleb couldn't see yet. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing. Just trees. And distance. But he trusted the signal. Not enough to act. Not yet. But enough to remember. Because if there was one thing he had learned, it was this. Ghost didn't react without a reason, and whatever was out there was already watching. Caleb Ward stood at the edge of town for a long moment, eyes fixed on the tree line where Ghost had been staring. The forest stretched out in layers of dark green and shadow, climbing toward the distant peaks of the San Juan Mountains. Nothing moved. No sound. No shape. No sign of anything out of place. But Ghost didn't look away. Caleb exhaled slowly, the breath fogging in the cold air. "Noted," he murmured. He turned back toward the road. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't something he could fight with empty hands and no shelter. Survival came first. Answers came later. The county building sat near the far end of town, a low brick structure with a faded American flag hanging stiffly from a pole out front. The door creaked when Caleb pushed it open, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet interior. Inside, the air was stale and warm. A woman sat behind a desk near the back, flipping through a stack of paperwork. She looked up as Caleb approached, her eyes lingering briefly on Ghost before returning to his face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for property listings," Caleb said. "Anything cheap. Doesn't have to be livable." That earned a small pause. "Not many people ask for that," she replied. "I'm not most people." She studied him for a second, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "Tax auctions, county repossessions. Mostly junk," she said, setting it on the desk. "Old structures, land disputes, things no one wants to deal with." Caleb opened it. Pages of listings, addresses, notes scribbled in margins. Most of it was exactly what she said, worthless. Until one entry caught his attention. Parcel 17B, San Juan Range. Structure, single dwelling, condemned. Previous owner, Ezekiel Boone, deceased. Status, abandoned. Minimum bid, $25. Caleb's eyes held on the name. "Boone?" he said. The woman gave a quiet, almost dismissive nod. "Old story. Lived out there alone for years. People said he ran with the wrong kind of crowd back in the day. Died sometime last winter. No family. No claim." "And the property?" She shrugged. "Still there. Technically. Structure's falling apart. Land's rocky. No utilities. No access road you'd want to trust in winter." Caleb kept reading. "Why is it still available?" "Because no one wants it," she said simply. "Too far out. Too unstable. And..." She hesitated, then added, "Some folks say it's not just the weather you have to worry about up there." Caleb looked up. "Meaning?" She gave a small, careful smile. "Meaning people talk." Ghost shifted beside him. Not restless. Focused. His head turned slightly toward the folder, nose twitching once. Caleb noticed. "Still available?" Caleb asked. "Yes." "How do I claim it?" The woman leaned back slightly. "You're serious?" Caleb met her eyes. "Yeah." Another pause. Then she pulled out a form. "You sign here. Pay the minimum. It's yours. No guarantees. No protections. No refunds." Caleb didn't hesitate. He reached into his pocket, pulled out what cash he had left, and set it on the desk. The bills were worn, folded. All that remained. The woman counted it slowly. 25, she said. That's everything, isn't it? Yeah. She slid the form toward him. Then I hope you know what you're doing. Caleb signed. The pen moved clean and steady across the paper. No second thoughts, no hesitation, just a decision made. Minutes later, he stepped back outside. The air hit him again, colder now, the light already beginning to fade behind the mountains. Ghost moved ahead this time, not pulling. Leading. Caleb adjusted the strap on his shoulder. All right, he said quietly. Let's go see what we bought. The path into the mountains wasn't really a road. It started as one, packed dirt, narrow but clear. Then it broke apart into something less defined, twisting between trees and climbing steadily upward. Snow clung to the shaded ground, crunching under Caleb's boots as they moved deeper into the forest. The town disappeared behind them. The silence grew heavier. Ghost moved with purpose. Not wandering, not uncertain. Every step placed with intent. Caleb followed. Hours passed. The light thinned. The air sharpened. Then Ghost stopped. Caleb halted beside him. Ahead, through a break in the trees, something took shape. The shack. Or what was left of it. It leaned slightly to one side. The roof partially collapsed under the weight of old snow and time. The wood was gray and splintered, boards warped and uneven. One side of the structure had sunk into the ground, as if the mountain itself had started reclaiming it. No smoke, no tracks, no sign of life. Just abandonment. Caleb stepped forward slowly. The ground beneath his boots shifted. Loose rock, frozen dirt. The kind of terrain that didn't forgive mistakes. Ghost didn't move. He stood at the edge of the clearing, body still, eyes locked on the structure, not scanning. Focused. Yeah, Caleb muttered. I see it. He approached the shack, circling once. Every angle confirmed the same thing. It was worse than expected. Unstable. Exposed. Barely standing. But it was something. And right now, something was enough. Caleb stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, one plank bending dangerously before settling. He pushed the door open. It swung inward with a long, hollow sound. Inside, darkness. Dust lents. The air smelled old, dry, forgotten. He stepped in. The floor held, barely. A table sat in the corner, one leg broken. A chair lay on its side. The remnants of a stove rested near the back wall, rusted and useless. Nothing of value, nothing worth protecting. Caleb stood still in the center of the room. Then he nodded once. All right, he said quietly. It'll hold. Behind him, Ghost didn't follow. Caleb turned. The dog stood just outside the doorway. Not hesitant, not afraid, just fixed. His gaze locked onto a single point inside the shack, near the far wall, low, close to the floor. Ghost stepped forward slowly. One step. then another. Then he stopped. Right there. His ears pushed forward. His body tightened. And then he scratched once, short, deliberate, then again, same spot, same intensity. Caleb watched him. "Not now," he said. Ghost didn't move, didn't look away, didn't respond. He scratched again. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He stepped forward, glancing down at the floor. Warped boards, dust, nothing obvious. Later, Caleb said, more firmly this time. He turned away. Because right now, cold was coming. Darkness was coming. And survival didn't wait for curiosity. Ghost stayed where he was, eyes locked, unmoving, as if whatever lay beneath that floor was more important than anything else in the world. And as the last light of day faded beyond the mountains, the shack stood silent, waiting, just like something else, still watching. The last light drained from the mountains fast. One moment, the sky held a thin line of fading gold above the ridge, and the next, it was gone, replaced by a cold blue darkness that settled deep into the trees. The temperature dropped with it, sharp and immediate, like the mountain had been waiting for the sun to leave. Caleb Ward moved quickly. Not rushed, not careless, just efficient. He cleared a space near the center of the shack, pushing aside broken boards and debris, creating a small working area. Every motion had purpose. Every second mattered now. Cold wasn't just uncomfortable up here. It was final. He pulled what he could from his duffel, a small emergency kit, a compact stove unit, a thermal blanket. Not enough to live on for long, but enough to get through a night. If the structure held. Behind him, Ghost hadn't moved. The dog still stood near the far side of the room, exactly where he had stopped earlier. His body remained fixed, muscles tight but controlled, his attention locked on that same section of the floor. Caleb glanced back. "You planning to help?" he said quietly, "or just stare at it all night?" No response. Ghost didn't even blink. Caleb watched him for a moment longer. Then he turned away again. Because right now, instinct or not, the priority was simple. Stay warm. Stay alive. Questions came later. He set up the small stove, checking the fuel with practiced hands. The metal clicked softly as he adjusted it, the faint hiss of ignition filling the silence a second later. A small flame flickered to life. Not much, but enough. The heat wouldn't spread far, not in a structure like this, but it created a pocket of survivable space. Caleb sat down beside it, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. The wind began to rise outside. It slid across the broken edges of the shack, pushing through gaps in the walls with a low, steady whistle. Snow dust drifted through the cracks, catching in the weak light of the flame before settling onto the floor. The mountain was closing in. Ghost finally moved, but not away. He stepped forward, one slow step at a time, closing the distance between himself and the spot on the floor. His nose lowered. His ears remained forward. Then he pawed at it again. Harder this time. A sharp scraping sound against the wood. Caleb looked over. "I said later," he repeated. Ghost didn't stop. He pawed again, then again. The sound echoed through the small space, cutting through the wind and the quiet like something deliberate. Caleb's expression tightened slightly. Not frustration. Recognition. This wasn't random behavior. Ghost didn't waste energy, didn't fixate without reason. Caleb knew that. But he also knew something else. Timing mattered. And right now, tearing into a weakened floor in a collapsing shack in the middle of freezing darkness was a risk. Ghost, Caleb said, more firmly now. The dog froze, but he didn't look away. Slowly, Ghost turned his head just enough to meet Caleb's eyes. There was no confusion there, no question, just certainty. Caleb held that look for a second longer. Then he exhaled. Tomorrow, he said. A compromise. Ghost didn't move for a moment. Then, finally, he stepped back. Not far. Just enough. Enough to show he understood. Enough to show he accepted it. But the tension didn't leave his body. He lay down near the spot instead, head still angled toward it, watching, guarding. Caleb nodded once. That was enough. For now. The night deepened. The wind grew stronger. The shack shifted with it. Small movements, barely noticeable at first. A creak in the beams, a faint groan from the walls. The kind of sounds that told you something wasn't entirely stable. Caleb didn't sleep. Not fully. He drifted in and out, his body resting, but his mind alert. Every sound processed, every shift catalogued. At one point, a sharp crack echoed through the trees outside. His eyes snapped open instantly. Breath short. Heart racing. For a split second, he wasn't in the shack. He was somewhere else. Somewhere louder. Brighter. The air filled with dust and pressure and heat. Then weight. Solid. Grounding. Ghost. The dog had moved without sound, pressing against Caleb's side, his body firm and steady, anchoring him back into the present. Caleb's breathing slowed. In. Out. Controlled. He placed a hand on Ghost's shoulder. I'm good, he said quietly. Ghost didn't move. Not until Caleb's breathing matched the rhythm again. Then he eased back, returning to his position near the floor. Still watching. Always watching. Hours passed. The cold pressed harder. The small stove flickered, fuel running low. Caleb fed it sparingly, calculating every minute of burn time. Outside, the storm began to build. Snow hit the walls in light bursts at first, then heavier, carried by wind that no longer whispered. It howled. The temperature dropped further. Caleb stood, moving to reinforce what he could. He wedged loose boards tighter, shifted debris to block gaps, adjusted the door so it wouldn't swing open under pressure. Each fix was temporary, but temporary was enough. For now. Ghost stood again, without warning. His head snapped toward the wall. Not the floor this time. The outer wall. His body stiffened. Ears forward. Silent. Caleb froze. What is it? He murmured. Ghost didn't move. Didn't growl. Just listened. Caleb stepped closer, his own senses sharpening. At first, nothing. Then a faint sound. Distant, almost lost in the wind, but not part of it. A low mechanical hum. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Vehicle. Far off, but not gone. Still out there. Still moving. Still searching. Ghost's earlier reaction replayed in his mind. The man at the cabin. The truck in town. Now this. Not coincidence. Not anymore. Caleb stepped back slowly. His gaze shifted toward the door, then back to Ghost. "All right," he said quietly. "Now we pay attention." Ghost relaxed slightly, not fully, but enough. The message had been received. Caleb moved back toward the stove, adding the last of the fuel. The flame steadied. The light held. Outside, the storm closed in tighter. Inside, the shack stood. Barely. And beneath the floor, whatever Ghost had found was still there, waiting. Just like the people in the distance, just like the cold, just like the mountain itself. Everything was closing in, and Caleb Ward knew morning wouldn't make this easier. It would just make it clearer. The storm had not passed. It had settled. When Caleb Ward opened his eyes, the world outside the shack had turned into a wall of white and gray. Snow pressed against the broken edges of the structure, filling gaps, piling into corners, softening the jagged shape of what little shelter he had. Inside, the air was colder than it had been during the night. The stove had gone out. The last of the fuel was gone with it. For a moment, Caleb didn't move. He lay still on the hard floor, staring at the ceiling where thin lines of light seeped through warped boards. His breath came out slow, visible in the cold air. Then he sat up. No hesitation, no delay. Because this was the line. Either he built something that could hold, or the mountain would take everything else. Ghost was already awake. The dog stood near the doorway, his body angled toward the outside, ears forward, listening. Snow dust clung lightly to his fur where the wind had pushed through the cracks. Caleb watched him for a second. "You hear anything?" he asked quietly. Ghost didn't look back, but his posture shifted just slightly. No immediate threat. For now, Caleb nodded once. "All right." He stood. Every muscle protested. The cold had settled deep into his joints overnight, stiffening everything, slowing him down. But he moved through it, pushing past the resistance the same way he always had, one controlled action at a time. He stepped outside. The cold hit him like a wall. Sharp, dry, immediate. The wind had died down, but the storm had left its mark. Snow covered everything in a thick, uneven blanket. The trees bent under its weight. The ground beneath his boots shifted unpredictably, hiding rock and hollow spaces beneath the surface. The shack looked worse in daylight. What had been survivable in the dark now looked temporary at best. Unstable, exposed. Not enough. Caleb scanned the area. Terrain first, resources second, time third. The order never changed. He moved toward the tree line, boots crunching through the snow. Fallen branches littered the ground beneath the pines, some dry enough to burn, others too fresh to be useful. He tested them quickly, snapping smaller pieces, checking weight, checking sound. Firewood. Step 1. He worked in silence, gathering, stacking, moving back and forth between the trees and the shack, building a small pile near the entrance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ghost stayed close, not idle. Watching. Every few minutes, his head would lift, ears shifting, tracking something beyond Caleb's immediate awareness. The same direction. Every time. Caleb noticed, but he didn't stop working. Because right now, survival didn't allow for distractions. By mid-morning, the first layer of the plan was in place. Fire, shelter, structure. Caleb moved inside and began reinforcing what he could. He pulled loose boards from collapsed sections and repositioned them along the walls, sealing gaps where wind had pushed through during the night. He packed snow into the lower edges, creating a barrier, not perfect, but effective enough to reduce airflow. Snow wasn't just a problem, it was insulation. Used right, it could hold heat. Used wrong, it would bury you. Caleb used it right. Ghost stepped inside behind him. But instead of settling, he went back to the same spot. The floor, the exact same section. And this time, he didn't just watch. He started digging again. Harder, faster. The sound of claws against wood echoed sharply through the shack. Caleb didn't look up immediately. He kept working. Repositioning a board, securing it in place, checking stability. Not now, he said. Ghost didn't stop. The scratching continued, more aggressive now, more urgent. Caleb stood slowly, turned, watched. Ghost's entire body was engaged now, front legs braced, shoulders tight, claws tearing at the warped boards with a focused intensity that didn't belong to curiosity. This was something else. Caleb stepped closer. Ghost. No response. The dog scratched again, then paused, looked up at Caleb, then back down, then scratched again, deliberate, insistent. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He crouched down, brushing away loose debris from the surface of the floor. The boards were old, warped, but not random. There was a pattern to how they sat. One section slightly raised, slightly different grain, slightly off. Caleb ran his hand across it, felt it, measured it. His mind shifted from survival to assessment. Ghost backed up half a step, giving him space, but his eyes never left the spot. Caleb exhaled slowly. All right, he said under his breath. Later just turned into now, but he didn't move to break it open. Not yet, because he understood something else. If something was hidden here, there was a reason. And reasons came with consequences. Caleb stood again, looked around the shack, checked the door, checked the walls, checked the outside through the cracks. Then he stepped back. We build first, he said quietly. Ghost didn't like it. That much was clear. His body remained tense, his focus unbroken, but he didn't argue, didn't push, didn't disobey. He simply stayed there, waiting. The rest of the day passed in controlled motion. Caleb reinforced the structure further, using what little material he had to create a more stable frame. He cleared snow from the immediate perimeter, creating a narrow path around the shack to prevent buildup against the walls. He constructed a crude support beam from salvaged wood, positioning it beneath a sagging section of the roof. It wasn't permanent, but it might hold. Might. Every action was a calculation. Every movement measured against time, energy, and risk. By late afternoon, the shack had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to stand a little stronger. Enough to hold a little longer. Caleb stepped back and looked at it, then nodded once. "Good enough," he said. "For now." Ghost stood beside him still, watching. The floor, the forest, the distance. Everything at once. Caleb followed his gaze again. The trees, the snow, the silence. Nothing moved. But the feeling hadn't gone away. That same quiet pressure, that same sense that something was still out there, still watching. Caleb turned back toward the shack. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. Ghost didn't respond, but his posture didn't change. Because whatever was beneath that floor wasn't going anywhere, and neither were the eyes in the distance. The second storm didn't announce itself. It arrived. The wind came first, low, steady, pushing through the trees with a weight that felt heavier than sound. Snow followed, not drifting this time, but driving sideways, cutting through the gaps in the shack like thrown sand. Caleb Ward saw it building before sunset. The sky flattened into a hard gray ceiling. The temperature dropped fast, sharper than the day before. The kind of drop that didn't just signal cold, it warned of something worse. He moved without hesitation. "Inside," he said. Ghost didn't need the command. They were already moving. By the time darkness settled, the storm had closed in completely. The world outside disappeared. No horizon, no trees, no distance, just white. And force. Inside the shack, every weakness was exposed. The wind found every gap Caleb hadn't sealed. Snow pushed through cracks in fine streams, gathering along the floor and edges of the walls. The roof shifted under pressure, the support beam creaking with a low, steady strain. Caleb fed the fire. This time, the flame held stronger. He had built a better base during the day. More wood, tighter insulation. The small space near the stove warmed faster now, the heat holding just enough to push back against the cold, pressing in from all sides. Ghost lay close, not resting, alert. Every sound mattered. Every shift in the structure registered. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Wind howled against the walls, no longer a sound, but a force. Snow struck the exterior in heavy bursts, building weight along the roofline. The entire shack trembled, not violently, but enough to remind Caleb that it wasn't meant to handle this. Not yet. Caleb adjusted the support beam again, tightening it, bracing it with another piece of salvaged wood. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, but the cold was already creeping into them again. He flexed his fingers, kept moving, stopped only when a deep, cracking sound split through the noise. Caleb froze. Ghost was already on his feet. The sound came from above, the roof. Another crack, louder. The beam shifted. Caleb moved instantly. "Back," he said. Ghost didn't hesitate. He stepped away from the center of the room just as The section above gave way. Wood snapped. Snow collapsed inward in a heavy rush, crashing down where Caleb had been standing seconds before. The impact shook the floor, sending a burst of cold air and debris through the room. For a moment, everything went still. Then the wind surged again, driving snow through the new opening. Caleb coughed once, clearing the cold air from his lungs. He pushed himself up from the ground, brushing snow from his jacket, checked his arms, his legs. No immediate injury. He turned. Ghost wasn't where he expected. Ghost? A low sound answered him. Not a growl. A short, controlled whine. Caleb moved toward it. The dog was partially buried near the edge of the collapse, one side of his body pinned under a section of fallen wood and snow. His ears were still forward, eyes clear, alert. But he wasn't moving. Caleb dropped to his knees. "Hold still," he said. His hands moved fast, clearing snow, shifting weight off the beam. The wood had caught against another support, preventing a full collapse, but it was heavy enough to trap. Caleb braced himself. Lifted. The beam didn't move. He adjusted his position. Changed angle. Used leverage instead of force. Lifted again. This time, it shifted. Enough. Ghost pulled free. But as he stepped back, his front leg faltered slightly. Just once, barely noticeable. But Caleb saw it. He reached out, steadying him. "Easy," he said. Ghost stood still, allowing the contact. Caleb ran his hand down the leg carefully. No break. No obvious damage. But the joint was tender. Bruised. Ghost pulled his leg back slightly, then set it down again. Testing. Still usable. Still standing. Caleb nodded once. "Good," he said quietly. But his eyes stayed sharp. Because now, everything had changed. The shack was no longer secure. The roof was compromised. The storm wasn't stopping. And they had one less margin for error. Caleb moved fast. He dragged what remained of the collapsed section aside, clearing space near the wall where the structure still held. He repositioned the stove, shifting it away from the opening to preserve what heat he could. Then he worked on containment. He used the tarp from his pack, stretching it across the broken section of roof, anchoring it with whatever weight he could find. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't hold forever. But it slowed the wind, reduced the exposure, bought time. Time was everything. Ghost stayed close, closer than before, not just watching now, tracking Caleb. Every movement, every shift. Ready. The storm pressed on. Hours passed without measure. The fire burned low. Caleb rationed wood carefully. Too much, too fast, and they'd have nothing left. Too little, and the cold would take over. He found the balance. Barely. At some point in the night, exhaustion began to settle in. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just a slow weight that pulled at his focus, tried to dull the edges of his awareness. Caleb fought it, stayed upright, stayed moving. Until Another sound broke through. Different this time. Not the structure. Not the wind. Outside. Faint. But there. Caleb turned his head slowly. Ghost was already facing the door. Body rigid. Ears forward. Silent. The sound came again. Distant. A low engine, struggling against terrain, but moving closer. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "They don't quit," he murmured. Ghost didn't move, but his posture shifted, from alert to ready. Caleb stood, moved toward the door, stopped just short of opening it, listened. The sound faded, then returned, then faded again. Searching. Not finding. Not yet. Caleb stepped back. No need to expose position. Not in this. Not now. He looked at Ghost. The dog's gaze met his. No confusion, no fear, just clarity. Caleb nodded once. "Good," he said. Because now, it wasn't just about surviving the storm, it was about surviving what came after. By the time the storm began to weaken, the shack was barely holding. The tarp sagged under snow. The walls groaned under pressure. The floor was cold, uneven, covered in patches of frost and debris. But they were still there, still breathing, still standing. Caleb sat back against the wall, one hand resting lightly on Ghost's shoulder. The dog leaned into it, just slightly. Enough. Outside, the wind softened. The world began to quiet, but Caleb didn't relax. Because storms didn't end things, they revealed them. And whatever had been out there, still was. Waiting. Watching. And now closer than before. The storm broke just after dawn. Not suddenly, but in pieces. The wind dropped first, fading from a constant pressure into scattered gusts that moved through the trees instead of against them. Then the snow slowed, falling lighter, drifting instead of driving. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Caleb Ward stepped outside carefully. The world had changed. Snow covered everything in thick, uneven layers, smoothing out the sharp edges of rock and ground, hiding the terrain beneath a clean, deceptive surface. The trees stood still again, branches heavy but no longer bending under force. No tracks, no movement, no sign of anything. But Caleb didn't mistake that for safety. He scanned the ridgeline, the slope below, the tree line beyond. Nothing. Still. Too still. Ghost stepped out beside him. He tested his injured leg briefly, placing weight, adjusting, correcting. It held. Not perfect, but functional. Then his focus shifted. Not outward, not toward the ridge. Back inside. The shack, the floor. Caleb noticed immediately. "You're not done with that, are you?" he said. Ghost didn't respond. He turned and moved back into the structure without hesitation. Caleb stood there a second longer, looking out, listening. Nothing. Then he followed. Inside, the damage from the storm was clearer in daylight. The collapsed section of roof had left a jagged opening, the tarp sagging under fresh snow. Light filtered through uneven gaps, casting sharp lines across the floor. The air was colder than before, but it was survivable, for now. Ghost was already in position. Same spot, same section of floor. Only now, there was no hesitation. He began digging again. Not scratching. Digging. Hard. Fast. Focused. The sound of claws against wood echoed sharply through the space. Caleb watched him for a moment, then crouched down beside him. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see it." He brushed away the loose debris again, clearing the surface fully this time. Now, in daylight, the difference was obvious. The boards weren't just warped, they were cut. Deliberately. Fitted together in a way that didn't match the rest of the floor. Caleb ran his fingers along the seam. Felt it. Measured it. Then he reached for one of the loose tools nearby, a short pry bar he'd pulled from the wreckage the day before. He wedged it into the gap. Applied pressure. Nothing. The board held. Caleb adjusted. Changed angle. Used leverage. The wood creaked. Then shifted. Just slightly. Ghost stepped back, giving him space. Eyes locked. Waiting. Caleb pressed again. Harder this time. The board lifted. A narrow edge came free, revealing darkness beneath. Caleb paused, listening. Nothing. No mechanism. No trap. Just space. He pulled the board up fully and set it aside. Then the next. And the next. Each one came free with more resistance than the last, like they hadn't been touched in years. Until finally, the opening was clear. A rectangular compartment built into the ground beneath the shack. Hidden. Sealed. Forgotten. Until now. Ghost stepped closer. Slow. Controlled. His nose lowered, scenting the air. Caleb leaned in. The smell that rose from below was dry. Old, not rot, not decay, preserved. That mattered. He reached down, careful, slow. His hand found something solid. Fabric, wrapped. He pulled it up. A bundle, canvas, worn but intact. He set it on the floor and unwrapped it. Inside, paper journals, several of them, leather-bound, edges worn but preserved. Ghost shifted again. Not done. Caleb reached back into the compartment. More items, a rolled map, tied with cord, a small metal box, sealed, heavy. He pulled everything out, setting it carefully on the floor beside him. Then he sat back, looked at it. Didn't touch anything for a moment. Because he understood something now. This wasn't random. This wasn't just storage. This was placed. Hidden. Protected. For a reason. Ghost sat beside him. Still. Watching. Caleb picked up the first journal. Opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting. Tight, deliberate, consistent. Notes, dates, locations, not rambling, not personal. Structured, precise. Caleb flipped through a few pages. Coordinates, sketches, references to terrain features. Routes, Movement. This wasn't just a man living in isolation. This was a man mapping something, tracking something, understanding something. Caleb set the journal down, picked up the map, unrolled it slowly. The paper cracked slightly with the movement, but held. Lines spread across it, hand-drawn, detailed. The surrounding mountains, marked paths, points of interest. Some areas circled, others crossed out. And then Caleb saw it. A series of markings that didn't match the rest. Not terrain, not natural, man-made, hidden locations, cache points. Ghost leaned forward slightly. His nose hovered just above one of the marked areas. Then another, then another. Same pattern, same behavior. Recognition. Caleb looked at him. "You've seen this before," he murmured. Not literally, but instinctively. The dog understood patterns. Movement. Purpose. Caleb exhaled slowly, then reached for the metal box. It was heavier than it looked. Cold. Sealed tight. He turned it in his hands. No visible lock. But the lid didn't give. He set it down, not forcing it. Not yet. Because there was more here than just objects. There was meaning, and meaning required patience. Caleb leaned back slightly, his eyes moving between the journals, the map, and Ghost. "This is why," he said quietly. Ghost didn't move, but his ears shifted. Acknowledging, because now, the shack wasn't just shelter. The land wasn't just survival. And the storm hadn't just been a test. This was the reason. And if someone else had been searching, if those vehicles in the distance weren't random, then this wasn't just a discovery. It was a target. Caleb stood slowly, moved to the door, looked out. The snow, the trees, the silence, nothing. But he knew better now. He turned back inside, picked up the journals, stacked them, wrapped them again, not hiding them, but protecting them. Then he looked at Ghost. "All right," he said. "We just stepped into something." Ghost stood, ready, because whatever this was, it wasn't buried anymore, and whoever had been watching wouldn't stay in the distance for long. Caleb Ward didn't wait. He moved with the same quiet urgency that had carried him through worse places than this, places where hesitation cost more than time. The journals were wrapped and secured. The map was folded carefully, committed to memory as much as possible before being tucked away. Ghost stood near the door. Alert. Not tense. Ready. Caleb stepped outside again, the cold air biting harder now that the storm had passed. The sky had cleared, revealing a sharp, endless blue that reflected off the snow with a brightness that forced the eyes to narrow. Visibility was perfect, which meant exposure was too. Caleb scanned the terrain again. Still no tracks. But that didn't matter anymore. If someone had been searching during the storm, they knew the general area. And now so did he. Caleb turned back inside. He spread the map out on the floor. Ghost moved closer immediately, lowering himself beside it, eyes following the lines, the markings, the circles drawn with deliberate precision. "This wasn't random," Caleb said quietly. His finger traced one of the routes, a narrow path cutting across elevation lines, avoiding open terrain, staying close to tree cover. Tactical movement. Not wandering. Another marking. A small circle, labeled with a symbol he didn't recognize at first. He flipped open one of the journals again. Found the matching symbol. Read. Coordinates. Short notes. Cache point. Dry goods. Tools. Caleb exhaled slowly, then nodded. "All right," he said. He rolled the map back up and secured it, then looked at Ghost. "Let's confirm. The route wasn't easy." The snow had covered everything, masking the ground beneath. Each step required testing, checking for stability, avoiding hidden drops, loose rock, buried branches that could snap under weight. Ghost moved ahead. Not far, never out of sight. His injured leg held steady, though Caleb noticed the slight shift in his stride when the terrain forced uneven footing. "You good?" Caleb asked once. Ghost didn't slow, didn't hesitate. That was his answer. They followed the path marked in the journal as closely as possible. Caleb adjusted where needed, reading terrain, compensating for snowdrift, aligning the map with what he saw in front of him. Half an hour in, Ghost stopped. Not gradual, immediate. His body stiffened, head turning slightly to the right, ears locked forward. Caleb froze, listened. Nothing. Then Ghost moved again, not forward, sideways, toward a cluster of rocks partially buried beneath the snow. He approached slowly, then stopped, lowered his nose, and pawed once. Caleb stepped closer. The rocks were natural enough, but the pattern beneath the snow wasn't. Too uniform, too deliberate. He brushed the snow away with his glove. Wood. Flat. Hidden beneath the surface. Caleb's eyes sharpened. "All right," he said. He cleared more snow, revealing a small, reinforced lid set into the ground. No markings, no handle, but it was there. Placed. Hidden. Exactly where the map said it would be. Caleb glanced around. Still nothing. No movement. No sound. He crouched down, used the edge of his pry bar to wedge into the seam. Lifted. The lid resisted, then gave. A dull shift. A break in the seal. He pulled it open. Inside, a crate. Dry. Intact. Protected from the elements. Caleb reached in and lifted it out, set it on the snow, opened it. Inside, tools, wrapped in cloth, preserved. A small supply of ammunition. Coins. Gold. Not a fortune, but real. Tangible. Proof. Caleb stared at it for a second, then closed the crate. Not surprised, just confirmed. "This was planned," he said quietly. Ghost shifted slightly, not interested in the contents. His focus had already moved on. Caleb followed his gaze. Further up the slope, another direction, another marker. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I see it. They didn't stop at one. Over the next hour, they located 2 more sites, each one exactly where the map indicated, each one hidden, protected, each one containing variations of the same thing: supplies, tools, information, movement routes. This wasn't survival. This was infrastructure. Whoever Ezekiel Boone had been, he hadn't just lived out here. He had built something, something organized, something intentional. And now, Caleb was standing in the middle of it. By the time they returned to the shack, the light had begun to fade again. The cold followed quickly. Caleb secured the journals and map inside, then paused, because something had changed. Subtle, but real. He stepped outside again. The snow near the tree line had shifted, not naturally, not from wind. Footprints, faint, partially filled in. But there, human, recent. Caleb's expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened instantly. Ghost stepped beside him, low, silent, eyes locked on the same direction. Caleb crouched, studied the tracks. Depth, spacing, weight, more than one, at least 2, maybe 3, moving carefully, not wandering. Searching. He stood slowly, turned toward the ridge, the direction Ghost had been watching since the beginning. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "They're not guessing anymore." Ghost didn't move, didn't need to. Because now, there was no question. This wasn't just about what had been hidden. It was about who wanted it back. And they were no longer far away. They were close. Close enough to track. Close enough to move. Close enough to come at night. Caleb stepped back inside. Closed the door, checked the structure, checked the exits. Then he sat down near the stove, the journals beside him, the map within reach. Ghost positioned himself near the entrance, watching, waiting. Caleb looked at him once, then nodded. "Tonight," he said, "we stay ready." Because whatever this had been, whatever Boone had built, whatever was hidden in those mountains, it wasn't just valuable, it was contested, and the next move wouldn't be quiet. The light faded early. Clouds rolled back in from the west, dulling the sky and swallowing what little warmth the day had left behind. By the time the last trace of sunlight slipped below the ridge, the mountain had gone still again. Too still. Caleb Ward didn't light the fire right away. He sat in the dim interior of the shack, letting his eyes adjust, listening to the silence settle. The journals rested beside him. The map was folded, close, within reach. Ghost remained near the entrance, low, silent. Every part of him focused outward. Waiting. Caleb reached over and set a small, controlled flame in the stove, just enough to keep the space from freezing, not enough to be seen from a distance. Light discipline, heat management, old habits. They mattered now. Time passed, measured in breath, in stillness. In the quiet shift of weight, when a body prepares before it moves. Then Ghost froze. No warning. No sound. Just stillness. Caleb's head turned slowly. His body didn't move. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. Ghost didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the door. Ears forward, muscles tight. Caleb listened. At first, nothing. Then, a faint crunch. Snow. Not falling. Being stepped on. Outside. Slow. Careful. Close. Caleb's hand moved without hesitation, reaching for the nearest tool, solid, balanced, familiar in weight. Not a weapon meant for combat. But enough. He stood. Silent. Positioned himself just off to the side of the doorway, out of direct line of sight. Ghost shifted slightly, not toward the sound, but to a better angle. Intercept position. The steps came closer. One. Then another. Then stopped. Right outside. A pause. Then a voice, low, controlled. "He's here," someone said. Another voice answered. "You sure?" The tracks lead right to it. Caleb's expression didn't change, but the tension in the room shifted. Confirmed. Not random. Not passing through. They had come for this. A third voice spoke. "Keep it quiet. We take a look. We move on." Caleb exhaled once. Slow. Measured. Ghost's ears flicked once at the sound, then steadied again. The door handle moved, just slightly. Tested. Locked from the inside. A pause. Then a knock. Soft, deliberate. "Anyone inside?" the first voice called. No answer. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. Ghost stayed silent. Still. Watching. The handle moved again. More force this time. The wood creaked under pressure. "Open it," the second voice muttered. A heavier step approached. Caleb adjusted his stance. Weight balanced, breath steady. Then, the door shifted inward. Just enough. A gap. A shadow moved through it. Ghost moved first. No bark, no warning, just motion. Fast. Precise. He lunged forward, intercepting the entry before the man could step fully inside. The impact was controlled, targeted, enough to disrupt, not to escalate. The man stumbled back, caught off guard. "What the?" He lost his footing in the snow and went down hard, the breath knocked from his chest. The others reacted instantly. "Back up! Back up!" Caleb stepped into view then. Not rushing, not aggressive, just present. Standing in the doorway, blocking it. The fire behind him cast a faint glow, outlining his figure without revealing too much. "Step away from the door," he said. Calm. Flat. The kind of tone that didn't need to be raised. The men froze. Not out of fear, out of recalculation. 3 of them. Dressed for movement, not for weather. Boots marked with the same pattern Caleb had seen earlier in the snow. The man Ghost had knocked down pushed himself up, breathing hard. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," he said. Caleb tilted his head slightly. "Don't I?" The man stepped forward again. Slow this time. More careful. "That land isn't yours," he said. "Never was." Caleb didn't respond. Ghost moved back to his side. Silent. But ready. The second man spoke up. "We're not here to make trouble. We just need what's underneath." There it was. Clear, direct. Caleb nodded once. "Then you're in the wrong place." A pause. The wind shifted, pushing snow lightly across the clearing. The men exchanged a look. Then the first one stepped closer again. "Listen," he said. "You don't know what you've found. That stuff, it's bigger than you think." Caleb's eyes held on him. "I know enough." Another pause. Longer this time. The tension stretched thin, then the man sighed, stepped back. "Fine," he said. "We'll do this another way." Caleb didn't move, didn't react, just watched. Because he'd heard that before, in different places, different voices. Same meaning. This wasn't over. Not even close. The men turned, one by one, moving back toward the tree line. No rush, no panic, just withdrawal, calculated, controlled. The last one stopped before stepping into the trees. Looked back. At Caleb. At Ghost. Then disappeared into the dark. The forest swallowed them. The sound of their steps faded, then vanished. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. Caleb stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching, listening. Nothing. He closed the door slowly, secured it, then turned back inside. Ghost remained still, eyes on the entrance, waiting. Caleb set the tool down beside him, sat near the stove again. The fire flickered low. Steady. "All right," he said quietly. "They're not guessing anymore." Ghost shifted slightly. Closer. Caleb leaned back against the wall, his gaze drifting toward the floor, the hidden compartment now empty, the truth of it no longer buried. Then toward the map. Then toward the door. "They know," he said. And this time, there was no question. The mountain had changed. The shack had changed. The stakes had changed. And whatever came next wouldn't be about survival alone. It would be about holding ground. Because now, he wasn't just a man trying to make it through winter. He was the one standing in the way. And they would come back. Not quiet, not careful, but ready, just like him. The night stretched long after they left. Caleb Ward didn't sleep, not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. He sat with his back against the reinforced wall, the fire low and controlled, the journals spread beside him in careful order. Ghost remained near the door, his posture relaxed on the surface, but his awareness never fading. Outside, the mountain held its silence, but it was no longer empty. That had been confirmed now. It was time to understand why. Morning came slowly. A pale light pushing through the gaps in the structure, settling across the floor in long, cold lines. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky and a stillness that felt almost unnatural after the night before. Caleb stood, moved to the door, opened it just enough to scan the clearing. No movement. No tracks close to the shack. But further out, faint impressions in the snow, where they had stood, where they had watched, then left. Caleb closed the door again, turned back inside. Ghost followed his movement, waiting. Caleb knelt beside the journals, opened one. This time, he read carefully, not scanning. Studying. Each page revealed more structure than the last. Coordinates tied to specific terrain features. Notes about water flow, soil composition, rock formations, but not random observations. Patterns, connections. He flipped to another section, detailed sketches, cross-sections of the land beneath the surface, fault lines, pressure zones, movement paths. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't just mapping. This was analysis, professional level. He picked up another journal, found similar entries. Expanded, refined, years of work, consistent, accurate. Then, he saw it. A repeated marking, not tied to supplies, not tied to roots. Something deeper. He reached for the map, unrolled it again, compared. Matched the symbol. 3 locations, spread across the ridge, not random, connected. Caleb leaned back slightly, thinking. Then he looked at Ghost. "We need confirmation," he said. Ghost stood immediately. Ready. The descent into town was faster this time. Not because the terrain had changed, because Caleb had. He moved with direction now, not searching, not guessing. Following a line of thought that had already begun to form. Ghost stayed close. His injured leg held, though Caleb noticed the strain more clearly on the steeper sections. Still, the dog didn't slow, didn't hesitate, didn't fall behind. They reached the edge of town by midday, the same buildings, the same quiet rhythm. But Caleb didn't stop. He moved straight toward the diner. Martha Hale looked up as he entered. Recognition came first, then something else. Concern. "You're still here," she said. Caleb nodded once. "Need a name," he replied. She studied him for a moment. "What kind of name?" "Geologist," Caleb said. "Someone who knows this land." Martha didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the back of the diner, then leaned in slightly. "There's one," she said quietly. "Retired. Doesn't come in much anymore." "Where?" "South end of town. Small place, name's Harold Finch." Caleb held her gaze. "You trust him?" Martha didn't smile. "I trust that he doesn't talk unless it matters." That was enough. "Thank you," Caleb said. He turned to leave. "Caleb," Martha called. He paused. She stepped closer. "You careful out there," she said. Not a question. A warning. Caleb nodded once, then stepped back into the cold. Harold Finch's house sat at the edge of town, just before the land began to rise again into the hills. Small, weathered, but maintained. Caleb knocked once, waited. Footsteps inside. Then the door opened. An older man stood there, his posture straight despite his age, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. "Yes?" Finch asked. Caleb held up one of the journals. "I think this belongs to your field," he said. Finch didn't take it immediately. He looked at Caleb, then at Ghost, then back at the journal. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in." The interior was quiet. Books lined the walls. Maps hung framed and unframed, layered over each other in a way that suggested years of work, not decoration. Finch motioned to the table. Caleb set the journal down, opened it, turned it toward him. Finch leaned in. At first, nothing, just reading. Then a shift. Subtle, but real. His eyes moved faster, focused, then stopped. He reached for another page. Flipped. Read again, then looked up. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Caleb didn't answer directly. "Is it accurate?" he asked instead. Finch didn't hesitate. "It's more than accurate," he said. He tapped the page. This is a full survey." He reached for another journal, opened it, compared, matched entries. His expression tightened. "This shouldn't exist," he said quietly. Caleb's gaze remained steady. "Why?" Finch looked at him, then at the map, then back at the journal. "Because if this is real," he said, "then whoever wrote it knew this land better than the companies ever did." He pointed to one of the markings. "See this? Fault line. They never mapped it correctly. That's why their drilling operations always run into problems out here." He flipped another page. "And this? Water table movement. That's not surface level. That's deep." He looked up again. "Where did you find this?" Caleb met his eyes. "On land, they just tried to take from me." Finch went still. The pieces connected. Slowly, but completely. "They didn't know," he said. "No," Caleb replied. "They didn't." Finch leaned back slightly, exhaled, then spoke more carefully. "If you have the rest of this, the full set, then you're not sitting on notes." He paused, then finished. "You're sitting on leverage." Caleb didn't react, didn't need to, because he already understood. Finch continued. "This isn't just about resources," he said. "It's about control. Whoever has this controls how that land gets used, safely, profitably." He looked at Caleb again. "And if someone else knows you have it..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Caleb nodded once. "They know," he said. Finch's expression hardened slightly. "Then you need to move carefully." Caleb stood, collected the journals, secured them again. "Already am," he said. Finch watched him, then added quietly, "If you need legal structure, someone to translate this into something enforceable." Caleb paused, looked back. Finch gave a small nod. Daniel Reeves, he said. Attorney. Works out of Durango. He'll understand what this means. Caleb nodded. Appreciate it. He turned to leave. Ghost moved with him. Silent. Steady. At the door, Caleb stopped briefly, looked back at Finch. Last question, he said. Finch waited. Who would want this buried? Finch didn't answer right away. Then, anyone who profits from not knowing the truth, he said. Caleb nodded once, then stepped outside. The air felt colder again, sharper but clearer. Now, there were no guesses left, no uncertainty, just facts and direction. Ghost stood beside him, calm, focused, ready. Caleb adjusted the strap on his shoulder, looked toward the mountains, then toward the road leading deeper into them. All right, he said quietly. They wanted it quiet. He paused, then added, now they don't get that choice. Because the truth wasn't buried anymore. And neither was he. The road back into the mountains felt different now. Not longer, not harder, just clearer. Caleb Ward didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every step had direction now, every movement tied to something real, something proven. The journals were secured in his pack, the map folded tight. The knowledge of what he carried settled into him like a weight that didn't slow him down, but sharpened him. Ghost moved beside him, steady, focused. No hesitation in his stride despite the strain still visible in his injured leg. If anything, he seemed more certain now, more aligned with Caleb's pace, like the purpose between them had finally locked into place. They reached the shack by late afternoon. Nothing looked disturbed. From a distance, it appeared exactly as they had left it. Quiet, damaged, isolated. But Caleb didn't trust appearances anymore. He slowed before stepping into the clearing. Scanned the perimeter. Checked the approach lines, watched for anything out of place. Then he saw it. Tracks. New. Not hidden. Not careful. Straight through the snow, leading to the shack, and back out again. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in him shifted. They came back, he said quietly. Ghost's ears moved forward. His body tightened. Caleb moved in. Low, controlled. He approached the door from an angle, not directly, keeping the structure between him and the open terrain. His hand rested lightly against the doorframe before he pushed it open. Inside, disorder. Not destruction, but disturbance. The floorboards he had removed were scattered, the hidden compartment exposed. Empty. No, not empty. Just searched. The journals were still gone from the compartment, because he had taken them. But whoever came back, they had expected to find something. And they hadn't. Caleb stepped inside slowly. Every sense active. Ghost followed, scanning the interior with the same precision. No one inside, no ambush. But the message was clear. They were escalating. Caleb walked to the center of the room, looked down at the exposed space beneath the floor, then around at the walls. The door. The broken roof. "They're not guessing anymore," he said. Ghost shifted beside him. Caleb nodded once. "Good," he added quietly. Because guessing had advantages. Certainty made people predictable. That night, Caleb didn't stay in the shack. Not fully. He reinforced what he could quickly, repositioning boards, covering the opening, restoring the appearance of abandonment. Then he moved. Not far. Just enough. A secondary position. Higher ground, overlooking the structure from the edge of the tree line. Ghost followed without question. They settled into position as the light faded. The cold returned. The silence deepened. And they waited. It didn't take long. Just after dark, the sound came. Engines. Low, controlled, closer than before. Caleb's eyes tracked the movement through the trees. 2 vehicles this time. Lights off. Moving slow. Careful. They stopped short of the clearing. Figures stepped out. 3. Same number. Same formation. But this time, no hesitation. They moved directly toward the shack. Caleb watched from above. Still. Silent. Ghost lay beside him, body low, eyes locked on the movement below. The men reached the structure. One stepped inside. Another circled. The third remained near the entrance. Guard. Caleb observed. Not intervening. Not yet. Because this wasn't about stopping them. It was about understanding them. Minutes passed. Then, frustration. Visible now. Movements sharper. Voices lower but edged. "They took it," one of them said. "Everything?" another asked. "Whatever was here, it's gone." A pause. Then, the leader. The same man. Caleb recognized him even from this distance. The posture. The control, "Then we shift," he said. "How?" one asked. "We find him," the leader replied. Simple. Direct. Final. Caleb's gaze hardened slightly. There it was. No more searching the land. Now, they were searching for him. The men stepped back from the shack. One kicked at the floorboards in frustration. Another scanned the tree line briefly. Too brief. Not enough. They didn't see him. Didn't see Ghost. Didn't see anything beyond their objective. That was their mistake. They returned to the vehicles. Engines started, then faded into the distance again. Caleb didn't move, not immediately. He waited, listened, counted the silence. Only when it settled completely did he exhale. "They're done playing quiet," he said. Ghost shifted slightly. Caleb reached down, resting a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder. "They're coming for us next." Ghost didn't need the explanation. He already knew. The next morning, Caleb returned to town. Not for supplies. Not for shelter. For structure. Daniel Reeves's office sat above a small law firm on the corner of Main Street. The sign was simple, unassuming. But Caleb didn't care about appearance. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. A receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Daniel Reeves," Caleb said. "I need to speak with him." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." She hesitated, then glanced toward the back. "Mr. Reeves?" she called. A moment later, a man stepped out, mid-40s, clean-cut, sharp eyes. He looked at Caleb, then at Ghost, then back again. "Yes?" he said. Caleb stepped forward, set the journal on the desk, opened it, turned it toward him. Reeves leaned in, read, and everything changed. The shift was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. "Where did you get this?" Reeves asked. Caleb met his eyes. "On land that was taken from me," he said. Reeves straightened slowly, closed the journal, then looked at Caleb with something new in his expression. Not curiosity, not doubt, understanding. "If this is legitimate," Reeves said, "then what happened to you wasn't just a property dispute." He paused, then finished. "It was a mistake." Caleb didn't respond. Reeves continued. "And whoever made it," he glanced down at the journal again, "is going to want to fix it fast." Caleb nodded once. They already tried. Reeves looked up sharply. Caleb held his gaze. "They came to the shack," he said, "twice." A long silence followed. Then Reeves exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. He picked up the journal again. "This changes everything." Caleb stood still, waiting. Because now, the fight wasn't just in the mountains. It had moved into something else, something structured, something official. And for the first time since that morning, the system that had erased him was about to see him again. Not as a problem, but as a factor. And this time, he wasn't the one being removed. He was the one holding the ground. The shift didn't happen all at once. It moved quietly, through paperwork, through calls, through people who suddenly started paying attention to details they had ignored before. What had been dismissed as a minor land dispute became something larger, something harder to contain. Daniel Reeves moved fast. Within days, formal notices were filed. Claims were challenged. Ownership records were re-examined. The journals were documented, verified, cross-referenced against existing surveys. And every time the comparison was made, the same conclusions surfaced. The land had been misunderstood, and the man who now stood on it had proof. Caleb Ward returned to the mountains before anything was finalized. He didn't wait for legal confirmation, didn't wait for permission. Because some things didn't belong in offices. They belonged where they started. Ghost walked beside him as they climbed back toward the shack, the trail now more familiar, the terrain no longer unknown. Snow had begun to settle into deeper layers, shaping the landscape into something quieter, more stable. The shack stood where he had left it. Worn, damaged, but standing. Caleb stepped into the clearing and paused. Not because he needed to, because he chose to. The place had changed. Not physically, but in meaning. What had been a last option had become something else entirely. Ghost moved ahead slightly, then stopped. Turned back. Waiting. Caleb nodded once. "I know," he said quietly. They stepped inside. The repairs came first, not rushed, not temporary. This time Caleb built with intention. He reinforced the structure properly, salvaging what he could, improving what he couldn't. The collapsed section of the roof was rebuilt using stronger support beams, anchored deeper into the frame. The walls were sealed tighter, layered with insulation that would hold through heavier storms. The stove was repositioned, upgraded, more efficient, more reliable. Everything had purpose now. Every piece of the structure tied to survival, but also to permanence. Ghost stayed close through it all. Moving when Caleb moved, watching when Caleb worked. Resting only when the work allowed it. His injured leg had improved, though Caleb still saw the slight hesitation in certain movements. He adjusted accordingly, never pushing him beyond what was needed. Because Ghost wasn't just support. He was part of the system. Weeks passed. Winter settled deeper. But this time, the shack held. Storms came and went. The wind returned. The snow piled high. But inside, it stayed warm. Stable. Controlled. Caleb tracked everything. Fuel usage, heat retention, structural stress. Just like the journals had taught. Just like Elias Boone had done before him. And through it all, Ghost remained constant. Alert. Present. Unshaken. The legal resolution came quietly. No announcements, no spectacle, just a call. Daniel Reeves's voice, steady and direct. "It's done," he said. Caleb stood outside when he took it, the mountains stretching out in every direction, the cold air clean and sharp against his lungs. "They've dropped the claim," Reeves continued. "Full reversal. The seizure was ruled invalid. You have legal ownership, not just of the shack, but the surrounding land." A pause. Then, "There's more." Caleb didn't interrupt. "The surveys," Reeves said. "Your journals, they've changed how the entire area is being evaluated. There are companies already asking about access, negotiations, development rights." Another pause. "They're offering a settlement," he added. "A large one." Caleb looked out across the ridge. Snow. Stone. Silence. Everything exactly as it had been. And yet, completely different. "I'm not selling," Caleb said. Reeves didn't argue. "I figured you might say that," he replied. A brief silence followed. Then, "If you need anything," Reeves said, "you call." Caleb nodded once. "Appreciate it." He ended the call and stood there a moment longer. Spring came slowly. The snow began to recede. The ground returned. The trees shifted from stillness to motion again, branches loosening, the air carrying a different kind of weight, life returning. Caleb expanded the structure further, added a second section, reinforced storage, created a system that didn't just survive winter, but prepared for the next one. The caches Boone had left were integrated, maintained, no longer hidden, but not exposed either, just part of the whole. One morning just before sunrise, Caleb stood at the edge of the ridge. The sky stretched wide, colors breaking slowly across the horizon, light pushing through the last traces of night. Ghost stood beside him, still, calm, watching. The mountains rolled out below them, vast and quiet, unchanged by everything that had happened, and yet for Caleb completely transformed. He took a slow breath, cold air filling his lungs, steady, controlled, no pressure, no urgency, just presence. "You were right," he said quietly. Ghost's ears shifted slightly, not questioning, just listening. Caleb glanced down at him. "You knew before I did," he added. Ghost didn't respond. He didn't need to, because he had never doubted. Not the place, not the moment, not the decision. Caleb looked back out at the horizon. The sun broke over the ridge. Light spread across the snow, across the land, across everything. And in that moment, it was clear. He hadn't survived because of luck. He hadn't held his ground because of force. He hadn't won because of what he found. He had made it through because he had listened, because he had adapted, and because he had never been alone. Ghost shifted slightly beside him. Closer. Just enough. Caleb rested a hand briefly against his shoulder, then let it fall. They stood there together, silent, steady, watching the light rise over a place that had once been nothing and had become everything. And this time, no one was coming to take it away. If you've ever had to stand your ground when the odds were against you, type yes in the comments. I'd like to hear your story. Sometimes justice doesn't come loud. It comes steady, earned one step at a time. And if stories like this mean something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more real stories of grit, land, and quiet victories waiting for you here.